Now 6:33, and I will continue to admit people once Mav starts. It is my great pleasure to introduce to you my birding mentor, Mav Kim, who in 2008 helped me get into birding, and since then has helped hundreds and hundreds of people in classes, in articles, having written her book, get into birding and to enjoy birding. So we are very happy that she, yet again this year, has agreed to do a 4-part series, this being the first session. So without any further ado, we are going to talk about bird watching in winter. And yes, take it away, Mav.
Thank you. I used to think that there was nothing to see in the winter at all, and that it was cold, and that it was mean, and that it was nasty, and that it was windy. And actually, it often is cold and mean and nasty and windy, but there are lots and lots and lots of birds. We may not even think of winter as a great time to go birding, because look at all the clothes we have to wear. As the days shorten and the nights start getting colder, many of the birds that nested here and raised young here back in the spring and summer leave us. We're up here shoveling snow and carrying wood for the wood stove, and they're basking in warmth in the Caribbean or South America or Central America or the Southern United States. But thank goodness not all the birds desert us. Our year-round birds are still here, and they're joined by lots of others. Black-capped chickadees perhaps are one of the best known birds in our state, and they show up in flocks, not just one at a time. And they're constantly searching for nutritious food. These are very common feeder birds. And they often take 1 or 2 seeds and then go store them in tree cavities or under bark. Another very common backyard bird are white-breasted nuthatches. These birds are somewhat shy during breeding season, but they happily come zipping in to feeders to grab a peanut or a sunflower seed and then leave again. And northern cardinals, which are gorgeous in the summer, are even more beautiful in the winter because they just glow without all that distracting foliage around them, like this female and this poor shivering male. He wasn't really shivering, but it made me shiver to look at him. The soft colors of mourning doves, often ignored in the summer, really show up beautifully against a snow-covered landscape. And we've got several species of woodpeckers that hang around all year. Downy and hairy woodpeckers look extremely similar. The hairies are bigger and their bills are bigger in relation to their head. But they both are around all the time, and we see them very frequently at backyard bird feeders where we can get really good looks at them. This is the first year that I knew why some of them are downy and some hairy, and it all has to do with those little feathers right at the base of their bill. And of course, pileated or pileated woodpeckers are around all year, and they sometimes come to suet feeders in backyards. This is the original woody woodpecker with its red crest and that really crazed laugh. And we have a lot of goldfinches around. This winter, an amazing number of goldfinches. This morning, we counted over 50 at our feeders, and we have 3 feeders out right now. They don't look like that beautiful picture up in the top left, all yellow and black and white. That's their summer breeding plumage designed to attract a female. Instead, they're all soft and beautiful, soft. They've sort of gone from gold to old brass or bronze. Now, many of the sparrows that were around in the spring and summer have left. Just at the same time, though, other sparrows are coming into Vermont. And this little bird is probably the most common backyard feeder sparrow, usually only 1 or 2 at a time. This is the American tree sparrow. And they can be easily recognized by that little red cap, a smudge in the middle of their whitish gray breast, and they have a 2-tone bill, black on the top and yellow on the bottom. Tree sparrows nest and raise their young way north on the Canadian tundra. And they come down here to Vermont for winter, just the way some Vermonters go to places like Sarasota for the winter. Ah, it's so nice and warm down here. White-throated sparrows are well named. The white throats are always noticeable. And there are two different kinds, one with the black and white stripes on the head like this one, and one with brown and tan stripes. And you'll probably see them together in flocks. They mate with each other. And this is one of my most favorite birds, dark-eyed Junko. They're easily recognizable. The males with their neat, dark gray or black, crisp white, and those little pink bills. And the females often look much more brown than gray, but they've still got that pink bill. Juncos show an extraordinary range of individual variation, as well as having several different kinds of species and subspecies in other parts of the country. But they show individual variation too. So don't be surprised if you see a Junko that looks like this, all mottled or weird. Or one that has large white patches. Tufted titmice, they are relatively new to Vermont, maybe 20 or 30 years. They weren't around historically, but they've expanded their range northward, and we're lucky because they are really adorable birds with that little crest and that extraordinarily large eye, and then a little blush of peach or apricot on the side. And some Vermonters may not know this, but we can also see these two birds in the winter when we're out winter birding. Eastern bluebirds and American robins. Both of these species eat mostly insects and fruit. And in years where there's been a really good batch of grapes, wild grapes, and small ornamental crab apples, these guys will just stick around and they'll find enough to eat all winter long, more frequently in the Champlain Valley than up here in Jericho. But we have seen bluebirds very frequently in the winter. And there's another whole family of birds that stay in the North Country all year round and are readily visible in the winter. And that's the corvids. Jays and crows and ravens, they're all members of the same family. And they can survive northern winters, partly because they're omnivores. They will eat absolutely anything. And partly because they are really smart. Corvids are considered the smartest avian creatures and among the most intelligent of any animal. Jays are the smallest of the corvid family. There are several kinds in North America, but only two here in the Northeast. And blue jays, I think everybody knows blue jays. Where they're bold, they're just bold. They come dashing down into a feeder and scatter all the little birds and scatter the seed and chow down and then take off. The other northeastern jay we won't see here in Chittenden County, but it had a color name also until just recently. It was called gray jay. And it's recently been given back its earlier name of Canada jay. And if you want to see a Canada jay, go any time of year, but you can also go in the winter, up to Vermont's Northeast Kingdom, the only part of our state where these birds can be found. And they can really easily be found. If you go birding up into the Northeast Kingdom, bring some food, and you might end up feeding a Canada jay right out of your hand. In fact, I can almost guarantee you will. The next Vermont corvids in size after the jays are crows. We have two kinds here in Vermont, American crows like these, and the slightly smaller fish crows. American crows are super smart. One pair was filmed, I saw a video of it. There were two of them, and they decided they wanted the food that was in a dog's outdoor dish of kibble. So one of the crows would go walk around in back of the dog, and it would tweak its tail, and the dog would quickly turn around while the other crow ducked in and took some pieces of kibble. And then the crows would take turns. The other crow would get some kibble. We don't have a good picture of a fish crow, so here's some information about them. They are slightly smaller. They have been seen every single month of the year in Vermont, but almost exclusively in the Burlington area. They're usually seen near water, not always. And there's an old joke about you can tell whether it's a fish crow by asking him, excuse me, are you an American crow? And if he says, then you know he isn't. He's a fish crow, because that's the sound the fish crow makes. The largest member of the corvid family is the common raven, and they are the most widely distributed of any corvid, found all over the Northern Hemisphere. They thrive in wilderness. They also do pretty well around humans. In fact, they're known for following bands of hunters, Native American hunters, for centuries now. They're not as social as crows, so you usually see them alone or in pairs, except at food sources like our old-fashioned open landfills. Then you might see quite a few, or at a really large carcass of a dead animal, like a dead deer or a dead moose. Anyone who is interested in ravens, and who wouldn't be, should read Ravens in Winter. Just a great book by Vermont author Bernd Heinrich. I would recommend it to anybody. It's just really good winter bird reading. In addition to jays and crows and ravens and chickadees and nuthatches and cardinals, doves and woodpeckers and juncos and titmice, we have several other big birds that stay in Vermont, Vermont all year round. And they're often easier to see in the winter when there isn't a lot of foliage around. Red-tailed hawks, this one doesn't have his red tail yet because he's an immature, are often seen soaring high in the sky at midday, when the sun has warmed up the ground just enough to make some nice thermals aloft. They're also very often seen on power poles and trees along major highways like the interstate. In fact, in several parts of the United States, the common name for this hawk is Roadside Hawk. This particular bird was a highly unenthusiastic participant in a bird banding demonstration down at Addison at Dead Creek. I love seeing northern harriers any time of the year, but their colors are particularly impressive in the winter. These beauties used to be called marsh hawks, which was a good name for them because they hunt low over marshes and grasslands. Northern harriers are a textbook example of sexual dimorphism. That means the two sexes look very different. This rich brown bird is a female, and this much smaller gray, white, and black bird is a male. Birders call male harriers gray ghosts, and we see them much less often than the females. I forgot what the ratio is, but it's something like 17-1 females to males, and no one quite knows why. 3 of Vermont's year-round raptors are accipiters. That's a family of hawks that are designed to live and breed and hunt in deep woods. And what they primarily hunt are smaller birds. All 3 of our accipiters have relatively short wings and very long tails, and they use that to steer among trees in rapid pursuit of songbirds. The smallest is a sharp-shinned hawk, and that name, by the way, refers to the front of their legs. Their legs aren't perfectly round, but they're sort of oval shaped, but we don't usually notice that. It's not a field mark to help us identify the bird at all. I love this action photo with those staring yellow eyes. It was taken by Jericho resident Mandy Applin, and she saw the bird right in her own backyard. And we had one in our yard a couple of days ago. We had 7 mourning doves breakfasting at our seed. And when this bird came through, they all scattered and completely disappeared. And one little downy woodpecker froze. He didn't move for about 8 minutes, completely frozen on a branch, being invisible. This, by the way, is a good place to mention that many members of Vermont's birding community generously donated photos for use in this program. And unless those photographers are given credit, the pictures were taken by me or by my partner, Bernie Paquette. The vast majority are Bernies. In general, Cooper's hawks, and this is the next larger one, larger than sharp-shinned hawks, are larger in general. But there is a lot of difference between the males and females, and a large female sharp-shinned hawk might be bigger than a small male Cooper's. That's common for raptors, birds that catch and eat live prey. The females are bigger. Both sharp-shinned and Cooper's hawks visit backyard feeding stations sometimes. They treat them as all-you-can-eat buffets. This big female caught 3 mourning doves on 3 consecutive days in our backyard. And then she disappeared. I didn't see her anymore. Our largest accipiter is the northern goshawk. And we've seen only one in our backyard, and that was an immature here. Several years ago, it hung out in my backyard for 5 days. But every time I went outdoors with the camera, it would take off. So this picture is greatly enlarged and isn't terribly clear. But this is a big and fierce bird. It can actually, it's called goshawk because it can actually take a goose as prey, which no other one of our raptors can, except perhaps an eagle. But they don't usually. They usually take smaller things like birds or rabbits or rodents. All of the birds we've seen so far this evening are around Vermont every winter, all winter. But some years, our regular resident birds are joined by large flocks of visitors that can make winter birding really exciting and fun. Let's start with big flocks of little birds, flocks that can be found in open agricultural areas, such as Addison County. These flocks are often made up of 1, 2, or 3 species, and they're all 3 in this photo: horned larks, snow buntings, and Lapland longspurs. Now, during the spring and summer, Vermont's little birds are busy defending their territories and courting and nesting by July. But earlier, it's usually just 1 or 2 birds at a time. Excuse me. But come winter, Vermont's little birds come in clusters. You'll be driving along a back road when all of a sudden there is an explosion of small feathered bodies in shades of tan and white and black, rising up from the edge of the road or from a nearby field. These are the 2 most common species: horned larks on the left and snow buntings on the right. The common or folk name for snow buntings back in the 1800s and part of the 1900s was snowflakes. And it really fits because a flock of snow buntings in flight can look like a snowstorm. One time, Bernie and I were down driving along a back road in Ferrisburg when we passed a really large manure pile topped with many tires. It was a cold day, a bitterly cold day. But the sun on all those black tires apparently created a mini climate that was considerably warmer, and a flock of 250 or more snow buntings was taking advantage of that relative warmth. The third little bird that can be seen in the winter along roads and in agricultural fields is the Lapland longspur, very sweet looking little bird. They're here in Vermont from November through March, but usually just 1 or 2 mixed in with a flock of snow buntings or horned larks. They're called longspur, by the way, for another thing that we don't see. It doesn't help us identify them when we see them in flocks or in flight, and that is that their back toe is unusually long. Oh, you can almost see the back toe there. In addition to the large flocks of little birds that can be found along roadsides and in farm fields, winter can bring large flocks of birds to backyard feeders. Birds that don't show up every year and that delight and excite birders when they do. The sudden appearance of big numbers of birds in areas where they aren't found every year is called an eruption, spelled like that on the screen. And fluctuations in food supplies are the most common reason for eruptions. Other possible reasons are a sudden upsurge in the population of a specific species due to the removal or absence of predators, or a population surge caused by an unusually plentiful food during the breeding season. These birds, all of which usually stay in boreal or northern habitats, are some of the most common eruptive species to show up at feeders here in Vermont. And that is a male purple finch, a bird the famous Roger Torrey Peterson beautifully described as a sparrow that's been dipped in raspberry juice. And here's a pine siskin. We haven't seen one at our feeder yet, but people are reporting them 1, 2, 3 at a time, mixed in with flocks of goldfinches. So it's good to look for them. They look a bit like, they're streaky, sort of nondescript little finches. They look sort of like streaky goldfinches, sharp pointed bills, short notched tails. In this photo, though, you can see just a bit of the subtle yellow edging on their wings and tail. Pine siskins are often identified by sound before sight because they make high-pitched, wheezy whistles as they're coming into a feeder. We Vermonters can see cedar waxwings any time of the year, any month of the year. They're beautiful, they're gregarious, they chow down on sumac berries and mountain ash and wild grapes and ornamental fruit trees. But their cousins, the Bohemian waxwings, show up only when they erupt down from Canada. These birds are hefty. They're sort of like cedar waxwings on steroids. They're brownish gray or sort of taupe colored overall with crests and black masks. And they have brick red under the tail, which you can almost see in that picture. Another big and dramatic bird that sometimes erupts down and delights us all are evening grosbeaks. These are heavy set birds. They got heavy necks, thick, powerful conical bills. The males, like this one, are yellow and white and black. They have those really pale bills and that distinctive yellow eyebrow. The females are more subtly marked. They're really golden highlights on grayish plumage, very soft looking. During eruption years, you can also see another kind of grosbeak, pine grosbeaks. These can be found in fairly large numbers, usually where there are ornamental crabapple trees. By late winter, the little fruits are all withered and soft, and apparently just irresistible to pine grosbeaks, like this handsome male. Many of the pine grosbeaks that visit Vermont some winters are immature males, birds that fledged just the summer before, so they don't have their pink colors yet. And I like this guy's really working to get the inside of every single little crabapple. South Burlington's Technology Park is a great place to look for this species during an eruption year. A feeding flock will stay near a single tree or a single group of trees until all the fruit is consumed and the trees are completely bare. These pictures were taken in Technology Park, I think just last winter. Now, during some eruption winters, backyard feeders can attract scores, even hundreds of these little guys, common redpolls. One year, I think it was like 5 or 6 years ago, I estimated 120 common redpolls at our feeders, but that had to be an estimate. These little birds never, ever stop moving. Even at night, members of the flock fidget and twitter. And when they're at a feeder or a stand of winter weeds, the constant motion is almost dizzying. These are tiny birds, but they can survive temperatures down to 65 degrees below zero. Fahrenheit, that is. And during winter, they sometimes tunnel under snow to stay a little bit warmer. I didn't know that until one early morning a few winters ago, and I looked out and there was a foot of snow on my barn roof, and it was shaking and heaving, the whole thing. It was sort of eerie looking. And as I watched, at least 18 little redpolls flew out, shook off the snow off their feathers, and flew down to the feeders for breakfast. This is a female common redpoll. Both sexes have that little red top notch, or not part of their forehead that gave them their name. But the males also had a pink bib, and this is a male. I found this little bird lying upside down on the frozen ground just last year in the winter, apparently dead. I brought him inside though and put him in a box and put the box in the room that has our wood stove in it. So it's probably 75 or 80 in that room. And after a little less than an hour, I heard a lot of fluttering coming from inside the box. So I peeked inside and saw this, little bright eyes looking right at me. And I took the box outdoors and took out the bird and held it on my palm. And I was delighted to see him make a really energetic leap and just take off across the yard. My guess is that the redpoll had either flown against the house and was stunned, or had been hit out of the sky by a predator, like a sharp-shinned hawk, and had fallen to the ground and had almost frozen to death. And all it needed was some heat to recover. Red-breasted nuthatches are here rather, but they usually stay away from human habitation. They live in really, excuse me. They live in really deep woods. But in eruption years, and last winter was an amazing red-breasted nuthatch eruption year, good numbers will show up at feeders. In fact, good numbers will be seen everywhere. Last year, there were 2 or 3 regular visitors to our backyard feeders, and we saw or heard red-breasted nuthatches every single time we took walks in forested areas for the whole winter. And here's a really unusual looking bird. It's a white-winged crossbill. The 2 mandibles of their bill actually cross. There are also red crossbills, which look similar, but they don't have that red, the bold white bars on their wings. The crossed bills helps crossbills get into tightly closed conifer cones. Every now and then, a crossbill might show up in Chittenden County. About 20 years ago, 3 spent 2 whole days at my feeders and just amazed me. But more often they're found up in the Northeast Kingdom. Another reason to take a winter trip up there. So if you're curious about whether this coming winter will be an eruption year, if you're wondering whether we're going to start seeing pine siskins and common redpolls at our feeders, or Bohemian waxwings or pine grosbeaks, wherever there are ornamental crabtuies, you can Google winter finch forecast, or you can join Green Mountain Audubon Society next Wednesday, December 15th, and you'll hear all about the winter finch forecast. For over 20 years, a man named Ron Pittaway, who lived way up in Toronto, got information starting in fall from birders all over Canada. And they told him about that year's crop of cones and birch seeds. And they told him about any sightings of birds that are usually eruptive species. And Ron would put all that information together and turn out forecasts that were wonderfully accurate. And last year, one of Ron's observers, a man named Tyler Hoare, took over from Ron. And he is the man who will be giving the talk on December 15th, next Wednesday. He has said, I don't want to be to spoil it, but he has said that this is not going to be an eruption year. Most of the boreal birds will stay north, But those of us in northern Vermont, the Adirondacks, Maine, and southern Quebec may still be able to find every one of the species that we've just seen if we look hard enough. So let's take a short break here and see if there are any comments or questions or any recent sightings of some of the birds that we've seen so far. And then we'll move on to bigger birds. Tom, you want to take it away?
Sure. Everyone, again, if you are familiar with Zoom, you probably know how to open up the chat so that it opens up on the right side of your viewing screen. If not, on the bottom of the picture of the white-winged crossbill, you'll see a little chat bubble. And if you click on that, that will open up the chat on the right-hand side. And on the bottom of that, you'll see type message here. So right now, we have only had two actual comments. One was from Elizabeth Spinney, who's also a member of our Green Mountain Board. To everybody, she said, the Spinneys in Huntington saw a pileated woodpecker last week, with an exclamation point and a smiley face. Another person attending has said, your photos are also nice. We just had a comment drop in, and I'll be passing that to Mav, and I'm sure it's probably in the second part of the program. It says, how about eagles? So Mav, let's, while we wait for other questions to come, how about eagles?
Well, that is just amazing, Tom, because that's the very next picture I'm going to show you. That person was, I don't know, had precognition. Let's leave the little birds. We'll leave them to their pine cones and their sunflower seeds and spend some time with big birds that we can enjoy during Vermont's winters, such as this handsome national symbol. Bald eagles, as everybody knows, I think, were in danger of extinction because of the pesticide DDT. But many years after DDT was banned, there were still no eagles in Vermont. In fact, we were the only state without breeding eagles of some kind. And it actually, I think, was a matter of injured state pride. So from 2004 to 2006, eaglets were brought from Maryland and Maine, and they were raised in something called hacking boxes, like that picture in the bottom right, fed by volunteers wearing eagle hand puppets, so they wouldn't think that they were humans rather than eagles. The hacking box on the right there was a Dead Creek Wildlife Management Area, and there were a few others in Vermont. And now these huge birds can be seen throughout the Champlain and Connecticut River valleys, especially in the winter. We see them better in the winter. Like there are about 40 breeding pairs in the state now. This pair, the picture there, is one that many of us today have seen. This is a pair that has fledged young from a giant nest in Ferrisburg for several years. The nest used to be an osprey nest, and then the eagles took over. Aside from some really well-known big nests like that one, it's not always easy to find eagles in the summertime, but in winter, they're often seen standing on the ice. One day at, I think it was Button Bay, we counted 9 eagles. People have reported as many as 16. They're very often on the ice under the bridge to New York State. They're keeping hungry eyes on flocks of ducks, but they also like to be near ice fishermen to have any of the fish that ice fishermen might throw out onto the solid ice for them. So I hope that answered the question about the eagles. Yes, they're around and you can find them.
So we have another question, Mav, before we go on. And one attendee would like to know, is it okay to tell us where in the Northeast Kingdom we can see the Canada jays? And I'll tag on to your answer depending on what you say.
Okay, yes. Moose Bog, walk into Moose Bog and stand on the wooden viewing platform and put some peanuts out on the viewing platform and just wait. People have seen Canada jays at the Nulhegan Basin section of the Silvio O. Conti National Wildlife Refuge, I haven't, but I've seen them at Moose Bog every single time I've been there. In fact, when you park your car at Moose Bog, which is called some weird name. Can you remember the name of that road? South America, South America Pond Road. Park your car there and put old donuts or peanuts or something like that on the hood or the top of your car and move away a little bit and just wait, and you will find gray jays. I can almost guarantee it.
The next question before we get to the second half, and I'm wondering if they thought of their question because we're still viewing the gorgeous eagle photo, is, do some birds actually mate for life?
Yes, some do, and I have to say I can't at the moment remember if eagles do. I think that they had the same mate for more than 1 year at a time, but I would have to look that up. That's something you can find online. Many birds don't. Many birds, switch partners actually in the middle of a breeding season, but others do mate for life. So that's a yes and a no answer.
Thank you. That's all the questions we have. So we're ready for part 2.
Okay. There's one big bird that's seen here in Vermont only during the winter. Rough-legged hawks are in the Northeast from November through March. They're most often seen in the Champlain Valley. They hunt the fields in Addison County. I love this picture, and I thank Josh Lincoln every time I look at it. It just shows the power and majesty of these hawks. By late March or so, these handsome birds have usually departed for their breeding grounds in the Arctic. And March is a time where those of us in Chittenden County might see them because they're migrating through. I don't usually see them in the winter here. And now to a kind of bird that many people think of as unique or special, mysterious, even magical, and that's owls. Owls have been around on Earth way longer than humans, 60 million years for the birds, 6 million years for us. But as soon as humans came along, I am sure they noticed these birds of the night. Owls are one of the few birds to show up in prehistoric cave paintings. They're featured in mythology and folklore from all around the world. There are over 200 species of owls found everywhere on the world, on the Earth, except Antarctica and some isolated islands. But here in Vermont, only 11 species have been seen, and that includes some real rarities. The 3 at the end there of the list have been seen in Vermont fewer than 20 times, and I think a great gray owl, I think I could count the times on one hand, and it may be only once. But most winters, it's the 4 kinds of owls that might be seen. The first 3 are non-migratory, so they're around all year, but they can be easier to find in the winter, particularly that first one. The name barred owl is pretty descriptive. This is a medium-sized owl. It's got horizontal barring on the chest and vertical barring on the belly. It's barred everywhere. And these birds can sometimes be seen in broad daylight. We saw this beauty, it was summertime, not winter, but we saw it just a few minutes past noon, right along a trail in Shelburne Bay Park. In winters where there's a lot of snow, or when there's a hard ice crust covering the snow, barred owls can't hunt as successfully in their usual wooded areas. So they sometimes show up near backyard feeding stations, close to starvation, like this one. If they're lucky, they might catch birds, or they might possibly catch the small rodents that are attracted to the dropped seed. The rodents are running around in trails underneath the snow, which makes it very hard for the owls to get at them if there's a crust, but they'll dig themselves out to get seed under feeders, and that's when the owls will descend. This owl stayed near our woodshed for a few days and actually took a rabbit, which is an unusually large prey for a barred owl. It couldn't carry it away like it would have for anything else. It couldn't eat it whole like it would if it had been a mole or a vole. So it stayed in our driveway eating the rabbit constantly looking nervously at the house to see if we were going to come out. These owls have a wide variety of noises, but their characteristic call is the one that humans say is, "Who cooks for you all?" Who cooks for you all? Who cooks for you all? And they also sometimes just go, "Hoo-ah." We listen in the night, sometimes in the daytime, but particularly at dusk or early morning. Now through March, we have a very good chance of hearing barred owls if we're anywhere near a wooded area, because they are courting right now, and soon they're going to be nesting and raising young. Now, this is a much less common owl, and they can be seen in Vermont only during the winter and almost exclusively along Lake Champlain. One place to see them is the open fields around Dead Creek Wildlife Management Area in Addison, usually in December, January, or February. And this photo was emailed to me by a woman whom I met as we were both standing on frosty dirt Gage Road, enjoying at least 3 cruising short-eared owls just as dark fell. These birds usually hunt at dusk and dawn, but they have been seen in the late afternoon, especially on cloudy days. When we were kids, I think we all learned that owls hoot, but actually most of them don't hoot. This one does. Great horned owls are quintessential owls. These are the birds that haunt the pages of children's books, the birds that most people imagine when they hear the word owl. And they're big birds, wingspan almost 5 feet. The females are larger than males. Again, that's a pattern common for raptors, but not common for most other birds. The male great horned owls make a hollow, somewhat haunting sound that's sort of like whoa, 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 whoa. And it is their territorial call. Usually occurs from dusk to about midnight, and then again just before shrieks, excuse me, shrieks and meows and coos and monkey noises and barks. Eastern screech owls are strictly nocturnal. They spend their days hidden in tree cavities, or in this case, in a wood duck box. And when they venture out, their plumage provides excellent camouflage. If this had been a natural cavity, rather than this man-made box, I never would have seen this bird. I was driving by and stopped the car quickly to get a better look and take a picture. The plumage really does look just like bark. These little birds come in 2 different color morphs, one gray like this and one more reddish. And I cannot imitate their sound. A lot of people can, most beautifully, but it sounds sort of like a spectral horse whinnying. Let's enjoy one more owl, an eruptive species that visits Vermont in numbers every few years and always in the wintertime. And the winter of 2013-14 was an absolutely extraordinary snowy owl year. Lemmings, the primary food of the owls during nesting season way up north on the tundra, had been particularly abundant the summer before. So the female owls were healthy. They laid large clutches, and food was so plentiful so that almost every single chick thrived. But then winter came, and there were far too many owls for the available food supply. And so the older owls chased the younger ones away. That's why this bird is not an all snowy owl. The immatures aren't all snowy. New York, New England, point south were flooded by first-year snowy owls. These tundra dwellers showed up in really unlikely places, the Carolinas, Florida, one even showed up in the Bahamas. A Vermont birder organized a one-day census in Addison County, and that resulted in over 30 of these big beauties. And many of the owls stayed in the same small areas for months, so people could go back and get repeated views. This owl preferred perching on farm equipment, flying down to catch small rodents. This one actually hunted from the rooftops in a brand new, still under construction, South Burlington development. And this bird was faithful to this snowy perch for almost 3 months. It was seen and photographed by hundreds of visitors from several states and provinces. And now we'll end up tonight with the truly astonishing winter duck show. There can be tens of thousands, that's accurate, tens of thousands of ducks and other diving birds on Vermont's lakes during the winter, with large concentrations on Lake Champlain. And most of these birds breed far north of us, and they come down to Vermont in the winter. Close up, parts of almost all these birds can look iridescent purple or dark green or dark blue, but at a distance, they mostly appear black and white. So a flock of them, or a raft of them, which is the term used for a flock of birds on the water, can look sort of like a long polka dotted stripe, or like a seething, boiling cauldron of small black and white chips getting tossed on the cold waves. Common goldeneye are one of the most numerous diving birds on Lake Champlain in the winter. They truly are common here. Rafts of goldeneye can number in the thousands. And aside, by the way, birders use either goldeneye or golden eyes as the plural. The males have rich black and white patterning on their sides, and their heads can appear black or glossy green. And the females have brown heads with mottled gray wings and backs. Both sexes have the diagnostic golden eyes that gave the species its name. If you go winter birding any time past like the last week of December or past New Year's Day, you might get to see male goldeneyes doing their courtship display, which they do for many, many weeks, even months. The little males stretch their heads forward along the water and then snap them rapidly backward with their bills pointed toward the sky, at the same time making a shrill, two-noted call. The males put a lot of energy into courtship, but once pairs are formed, and after the changes in daylight trigger the irresistible urge to move north, the pairs do migrate together, and they most end up on breeding territories in Canada or Alaska. But the male goldeneye is all energy and devotion during that prolonged courtship, and the minute the female lays her eggs, he abandons her. And he lives a carefree bachelor existence until it's time to come south again. Another regular visitor to Lake Champlain in winter is the Buffle Head. This is North America's smallest diving duck. They're not present in the same huge numbers of goldeneye, but nice to us, they tend to be a little bit closer to land, at the ferry docks in Charlotte and Grand Isle, in Shelburne Bay or Converse Bay, visible from the Charlotte or Shelburne town beaches. The size and shape of that white patch on the drake's head changes depending on how excited or agitated or defiant or aggressive or amorous he's feeling. Next, the bane of many birders, scaup. We have two species of scaup here in Vermont in the winter only, greater and lesser, and they look very similar. The males of both species have dark heads and breasts and light colored bills and white or whitish sides and gray backs. And the females of both species have brown heads with white patches at the base of the bill. And I won't take time tonight with the characteristics that do help birders distinguish between these two very similar species. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it is easier when they're flying, but very often there are spirited debates about which bird we're actually looking at. There's a lot of information online if you want to study it. This picture shows why scaup have a common name in parts of the country. They're called bluebill or blue-billed duck. And just a couple of weeks ago, we ran into a duck hunter. Well, actually, it was about a month and a half ago, who had a dead scaup in his hand. And he said, I got myself a bluebill. Next, a quick look at scoters. Scoters usually show up in really small numbers on Vermont lakes in November and December, and then they head to the seacoast. It's pretty rare to see one past December in Vermont. And the males of all three kinds of scoters that spend time here in Vermont are distinguished by bills that look swollen or even deformed. This is particularly so for this species, the surf scoter. Their bills are big and they're oddly shaped, and they're white and red and yellow and black, maybe sometimes a little orange. Although at a distance, their bills can appear mostly orange, and it really looks good with that white eye. This beautiful little sea duck, called a sea duck, but it still does show up on Lake Champlain, is one of my very favorite birds. They have incredibly sweet faces, and they're just lovely. The male's prominent tail feathers can be seen whether he's on the water or flying. You won't find long-tailed ducks at all, by the way, if you have an older field guide. It won't be in there. And it's not because they weren't around. They've been around for hundreds of years. But until 2000, they were called old squaws. Then the American Ornithologists Union, or AOU, changed the bird's English name. The population of these birds is declining, and the AOU reasoned that effective conservation management would require the help of local native Alaskans. And the name old squaw is just plain offensive. Besides, they're called long-tailed ducks in other parts of the world. Under the Champlain Bridge between Addison and New York State is a great place to look for very diverse winter flocks. There's been a diverse winter flock there now for about the last 4 weeks, I think. All of the species we've seen so far of diving birds can be seen there, along with large rafts of this species, common mergansers. These ducks used to be called sawbills because they have serrated bills, which really help them hold on to slippery fish, and they're exclusively fish eaters. Other species sometimes join those large flocks under the Champlain Bridge, including familiar dabbling ducks that we all know, like mallards or American black ducks. And dabblers can't get to the depths of Champlain's icy waters to bring up tasty and nutritious mussels or clams, but they get to eat some anyway. One day I watched 2 black ducks that were hanging out with Scaup and Goldeneye. And whenever a nearby diving duck came up with a mussel, the black duck would take off after it like a torpedo. And often the attack startled the diver into dropping the prey. And then the black duck would immediately retrieve the bivalve before it fell too far into the water. Big flocks of winter diving birds also include some that aren't ducks at all, like horned greaves. These appealing little birds dive often and spend a long time on each dive. So if you're standing at, for instance, Charlotte Town Beach, and there doesn't look like there's a single thing on the water, just wait a few minutes. One day, I counted well over 100 horned greaves scattered all over the place. Now, we tend to think of common loons like this, resplendent, deep black and crisp white. But loons change their plumage in the winter, and they can even look a bit like hefty horned greaves from a distance. Their gray colors blend really well with wintry waters. So here's a look at some places to find Vermont's rich assortment of winter water birds if you want to go out tomorrow. This list goes from north to south along the lake from Burlington. There are more sites further south, but I'm just not familiar with them as a birder. Every one of these locations is an eBird hotspot. So you can go to ebird.org, go to explore, go to hotspots, type in the name of any one of these, and you will get maps, directions, descriptions, GPS coordinates, and lists of all the birds that have been seen there. I'm going to mention only 2 of all these areas. For hardy souls, the Colchester Railroad Causeway can provide great close-ups of hundreds, sometimes thousands of waterfowl. Occasionally, rafts of ducks will stay relatively close to land on the Colchester end, so we can see them without walking out very far. More often though, the waterfowl rather, is near the cut, and the cut is way out there near the north end of the causeway. It is a long, cold, and windy trek to the cut from the Colchester end. It's a much shorter and easier walk from the South Hero end of the causeway. And there, right in front of you and around the cut and in the cut, may be hundreds of waterfowl. You can see the rest of the causeway right across there, right across the cut, heading for Colchester. And I mentioned before that Champlain Bridge, or Chimney Point, the bridge to New York State in Addison, is a great winter birding hotspot. You just turn off Route 17 just a few yards before the bridge to New York State into the driveway for a small museum. And you can stand in the state fishing access parking lot and look up and down the lake, as we did on this day. This was late winter, early spring last year. And we saw mallards, black ducks, mergansers, goldeneye, buffle heads, cormorants, 2 species of gulls, 2 bald eagles, and even several snow geese. You can also walk up to the sidewalks on the bridge and look down on large rafts of diving ducks. And there have been a couple of real rarities there this year, right at the bridge to New York State. So birding during frosty Vermont winters, yes, it is diverse. It is enjoyable. You can watch your backyard feeders, stay snug in your own home while the birds brave the cold and the snow. You can start haunting housing developments and industrial areas that have lots of ornamental crabapple trees. And maybe you'll get to enjoy Bohemian waxwings or pine grosbeaks. You can drive along dirt roads and by agricultural fields, scanning for some of the little birds that feed there all winter. And you can find thousands and thousands of birds on Lake Champlain. You might even spot a rarity, like this Sparrow's goldeneye, a relative of the common goldeneye, a bird that's more often seen in Alaska than in Vermont. And anytime you're out birding in the winter, keep your eyes open and your mind alert for any one of the wonderful surprises that previous Vermont winters have brought. Over the years, several northern hawk owls have visited the state. This bird chose a few acres along Route 100 in Waterbury Center and was there for over 3 months. Hawk owls are owls, but they have smaller heads proportionate to their bodies than most owls, and they have long tapered tails like many hawks. The next hawk owl picture was taken from the web, and I hope it's true, not a hoax or something, but it amuses and delights me every single time I look at it. A man in Finland was out in his canoe when he saw a small bird struggling in the frosty water, frigid water. He extended his paddle, lifted the bird, and put it on the front of his boat. And a little later, he tucked the wet and freezing owl under his vest and brought it to shore. Another bird rescue, like my redpoll rescue, with a happy ending. Eastern mockingbirds, believe it or not, are also seen in the winter. They are more frequent than the hawk owls. I've seen mockingbirds in the winter in Ferrisburgh, Addison, and Westminster, all in the dead of winter. And winters in Vermont have also brought several vagrants. Vagrants are single birds that can show up hundreds or thousands of miles from where they're supposed to be. We've had a sparrow here in Vermont that should have been in the middle of Canada or the US. Another sparrow that should have been on the West Coast. We've had a few varied thrushes, another West Coast bird. This individual had birders flocking to a trailer park in Bolton. A relatively minor food source kept the bird going for several months. A dryer vent from one trailer kept a narrow section of the hill melted, and the bird was often seen digging for insects in the dead leaves in that melted section. Many of us enjoyed the bird and enjoyed meeting the homeowners who warmly welcomed birders and even shared coffee and cookies. Winter birding can be a great way to get outdoors in the fresh air at a time of year where too many of us spend indoors. But it's important believe me, to wear more layers than you think you possibly can need. Tights, long johns, fleece, wool, polypro, wind pants, headbands, hats, scarves, glove liners, mittens, and insulated boots. And then, once you're all properly garbed, like these birders at Shelburne Bay, go outdoors and brave the elements and enjoy winter birding. It's cold and wet and windy and totally wonderful. Thank you.
Oh, Mav, that was wonderful. And we have some questions for you.
Good.
So the first question, and I know that you are well versed in this one, is there a recommended best feed for birds during winter?
Well, yes. Birds love black oil sunflower, but most black oil sunflower seed, all black oil sunflower seed, has two problems with it. One, it leaves the hulls all over the ground, which can draw rats and other rodents, and also can be a disease festering thing for birds. And two, I just read recently that 3/10 of every bag of black oil sunflower seed is husk. So 3/10 of what you're paying, it won't get eaten by birds. So I would say that the number one food is hulled sunflower seed, which you can buy in usually in small, fine, medium, or coarse size. We find that every single bird likes that. The little tiny birds like goldfinches can handle it easily because there are no hard husks. The big birds like jays love it. We also put out unsalted peanuts. And it's been amazing how many different species eat that. We've even had white-throated sparrows eating unsalted peanuts. I have to advise against Niger seed or finch food just because so much of it hasn't been, it's a thistle. So people don't want thistle seed on the ground because it's going to sprout next year. So it all gets heat treated. And some of it gets treated to too much heat. And it's just dry and the birds won't eat it at all. So I've heard from so many birders who spent a lot of money on thistle seed and then ended up having to throw it all out because it just sits there on the feeder all winter. So it's great if you absolutely know if you think of it like coffee beans, if it looks beautiful and dark and shiny, every single seed, then it's probably good, but otherwise no. So those I would say are the three biggies. And suet is really good for a lot of birds, particularly in the coldest part of the winter.
So we've had a comment. One person has said, quote, Mav recommended Guy's Farm and Yard for the hulled sunflower seed. And although prices had gone up, they came back down a bit when I was there yesterday, unquote. I also would like to recommend Guy's, and one of the brands that I buy is called Lyric, as in music, and it is all hulled and there's no mess. And as Mav said, different birds tend to like different components of it. So the next question, Mav, is it's kind of related. There's two of them. What's the best way to keep track of guided bird walks in the winter? I live in Burlington, but I'm glad to travel around. And one person asked if you, my mentor Mav, are guiding any walks these days.
I haven't had a single bird walk since COVID started, and I probably won't. We've had a family member extended family member who's at high risk, and I have a beloved friend who's at high risk. And they were both told by their doctors that anybody can infect them, even a fully vaccinated person. So both of us are being paranoid to the very extreme. So no, I'm not leading any now. But the Vermont Center for Eco Studies maintains a list of guided bird walks in the state. I don't have the link right in my mind, but they do. Green Mountain Audubon Society has led walks. There are walks at the Birds of Vermont Museum in Huntington. I can't think. North Branch Nature Center in East Montpelier has walks also, and I believe they're continuing those during the winter. So that's the best.
The next question is just the kind of a comment, and I'm going to handle this. It says, I'm curious, why did you refer to scops as a bane for birders? And That's simply what the word bane should be maybe construed as puzzle, because it is difficult to concretely and confidently distinguish between a lesser scup and a greater scup until you've had a lot
Right.
of viewing experience. So that's the bane means it's a difficult identification to make.
It's
We have a couple.
they're hair pullers. That's what they are. Sometimes.
Here's a question. Is it important to have different types of feeders? For example, tube feeder, ground feeder, seed balls, or is it not necessary?
Yes, it's very important. Evening grosbeak, cardinals, other things with those big bills very often can't even handle tube feeders. They can't get any food out of them at all. Whereas other birds are uncomfortable going to a tray feeder. So yes, it's a really good idea to have a diversity of feeders out there.
I don't know the answer to the next question. Is it okay to feed birds seed that has been treated with hot pepper to deter squirrels?
Apparently it does not hurt the birds, but also I can tell you from experience, it doesn't deter the squirrels. We did that one year and the squirrels kept away from the seed for about a week. And then they seemed to develop a real taste for Mexican food. They just went right back chowing it down. So I don't think it hurts the birds, but I also don't think it really works. The better thing is to get Squirrel Guards for any poles or feeders that are, they say squirrel proof, but it should say squirrel resistant. We've had a lot of luck with Rome's Squirrel Buster. I think it's just the 10th year I've had it and I've never seen a squirrel on it. And we've also had a lot of luck with one other that I can't think of the name right now. But there are some out there, they're expensive, but you know, I think they're worth it because you don't lose your seed.
And towards the end of this, Mav, I'd like you to take a moment to talk about the Christmas bird count that has a new one has been added thanks to your hard work. Tell us about what's going to be happening and those of us who are going to be out in the cold looking.
You know, it isn't supposed to be even cold. It's going to be almost 50 degrees, which is extraordinary for a Christmas bird count. The Audubon Christmas bird count started 122 years ago as an alternative to it was a thing to go out and shoot birds on Christmas. People would end up with huge piles of dead songbirds, and that disgusted some people. So they started this thing of going out and counting birds instead of shooting them. And the data collected from these counts is used by scientists to keep track of bird populations and trends, etc. We just started a new one called the Tri-County Christmas Bird Count Circle. Each count is done in a 15-mile diameter circle. So our circle is in Chittenden and Franklin and Lamoille counties, parts of all those counties. And we now have over 24 birders who are going to be walking, cross-country skiing or snowshoeing, depending on what we got out there, driving or sitting watching their feeders. So we've got more than 24 traveling birders and several feeder watchers. And they're going to be busy on December 16th from dawn to dusk, counting as many birds as we can in an area that includes parts of Milton and Fairfax and Fletcher and Cambridge and Jeffersonville and Essex and Jericho and Underhill. I think that's
It's centered in Westford.
Right, centered in Westford, exactly. And it's going to be really fun. We just yesterday signed on an entire school. The Barnes School in Westford, which has 3 teachers and 16 pupils, they put up a bunch of feeders. We went out to visit them and saw their feeders, and they're all excited. It's a big unit that they're going to be doing. They're going to be feeder watching for Christmas bird count.
And the next Christmas bird count, we have the coordinator for that, Elizabeth Spinney, who has just mentioned in the chat that the Green Mountain Audubon Society is going to host the Burlington Christmas bird count on December 19th. And you can find information about that on the Green Mountain website. And Elizabeth has just kindly, because she's fast on the draw, typed into the chat the link for that. We did have a couple other questions as we are ending tonight's fabulous presentation. And one is, The person says, it's not exactly a bird question, but have you heard of a state of Vermont study on flying squirrels going on this winter? I heard they were looking for volunteers. Do you know anything about that one?
I don't. I've only seen one flying squirrel in my life. You got to go out in the middle of the night. It was right in the backyard. They're not rare, but no, I don't know anything about that.
Well, I am going to take this opportunity. It's 7:43. Thank you so much. Again, Mav has agreed to do a series. Mav, what is our next presentation that you'll be giving us?
Oh, for a minute I forgot. The next two go together. The first one is called The Birds and the Bees in Birdland. And it's all about how we can identify which are male birds and which are female birds, how they identify which are male birds and female birds, and some courtship behavior. And the one after that is called, it's all about nests, which follows courtship. And it's all about all the different kind of nests that birds make and what goes into them and what bird makes what nest, etc. And then the last. Do
you know the dates of those by chance?
I should. I can in a minute. Just one second. And the last one in the series is one that I just worked up, and it's been fun to work up. It's what's in a name? We all wonder sometimes why a bird has this name. And this is all about why birds get the names they do, and some information on a movement to change some bird names. Yes, the Birds and the Bees in Birdland is January 27th. The Bird's Nest, custom made, custom designed for the Going family, is February 24th. And What's in a Name is March 17th.
And coming up again, Green Mountain is partnering with the North Branch, who is hosting the Winter Finch Forecast by Tyler Hoare. This particular program has been recorded, so you can refer others to it. And there's a link to our past presentations on our Green Mountain website. You are getting all sorts of fabulous thank yous, Mav, from the participants. I, too, on behalf of the Green Mountain Audubon Society, would like to thank you and wish you a warm and wonderful time until we go out into the winter. So good night, everybody. We thank you so much. We hope you enjoyed it. Well done, Mav. Good night, everyone.
Thank you, and good night, everyone.